In the autumn of 1719, a narrow Paris street called the Rue Quincampoix had become the center of the financial world. Thousands of people packed it shoulder to shoulder from dawn to midnight, screaming prices, waving paper, buying and selling shares in a single company that they believed would make them all rich. Fortunes were being made in an afternoon, and the entire frenzy rested on the promises of one man: a foreigner, a gambler, a convicted killer who had escaped a death sentence. Sinister business, bankrupt empire. His name was John Law, born in Edinburgh in 1671, the son of a goldsmith. He was brilliant with numbers and reckless with everything else. In London, a quarrel over a woman ended in a duel, and Law killed his opponent with a single thrust. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. Somehow he escaped from prison and fled to the continent, where he spent years as a professional gambler, winning fortunes at the card tables by calculating odds in his head faster than anyone alive. But Law was more than a gambler. He had a radical idea about money itself. Gold and silver, he argued, were not real wealth. They were just tokens. The true wealth of a nation was its land, its trade, its people. So why chain an economy to however much metal happened to sit in a vault? Print paper money, backed by the nation's wealth, put it into people's hands, and you could awaken a sleeping economy. In his time, this was close to heresy. In 1715, Law found the desperate customer he needed. The Sun King, Louis XIV, had just died, leaving France crushed under a mountain of war debt so vast the state was effectively bankrupt. The man left holding the wreckage was the Regent, Philippe of Orléans, ruling for a child king and willing to try almost anything. Into his court walked John Law, the fugitive, with a cure for a bankrupt kingdom. In 1716, Law was allowed to open a private bank, the Banque Générale. It did something Frenchmen had never seen. It issued paper banknotes, promises that could be exchanged for coin. At first, it worked beautifully. The notes were convenient, they held their value, trade quickened. Confidence grew. 2 years later, the bank was taken over by the Crown and renamed the Banque Royale, its notes now guaranteed by the king himself. Then came the second half of the machine. Law founded a trading company, soon known as the Mississippi Company, and handed it a monopoly over France's enormous territory in North America. The entire Mississippi River Basin, Louisiana, a wilderness rumored to be full of gold and silver. Then he kept adding. The China trade, the East Indies, tobacco, the Royal Mint, even the collection of the nation's taxes. One company was swallowing an entire economy. Now, Law fused the two halves together. And this was the masterstroke. The company would take over France's crushing national debt. If you were owed money by the bankrupt government, you could trade those near-worthless state bonds for shining new shares in the Mississippi Company. The nation's debt was being quietly transformed into stock. And to buy more shares, people used the paper money pouring out of Law's bank. Bank and company, notes and shares, all feeding each other. What followed was one of the first great speculative manias in history. The price of a single share climbed from around 500 livres to 10,000, and people lost their minds. The Rue Quincampoix overflowed day and night. Servants who had bought a few shares became richer than their masters. A new word was coined to describe these overnight fortunes: millionaire. One hunchback supposedly grew wealthy, renting out his hump as a writing desk for traders signing contracts in the crowd. John Law was now the most celebrated man in Europe. Crowds mobbed his carriage. Duchesses pretended to faint in his presence just to get an audience. And at the start of 1720, the fugitive who had once been sentenced to hang in London was appointed Controller General of Finances, the most powerful financial post in France. A foreign gambler now ran the economy of the greatest kingdom on earth. But underneath the soaring share price, there was almost nothing. Louisiana was not a land of gold. It was swamp, heat, and fever, with a tiny, struggling settlement. To populate it, France rounded up the poor, the orphaned, and the imprisoned, and shipped them across the ocean, where many quickly died. The company's actual profits were a trickle. The value of the shares had detached completely from anything real. It was being held up by nothing but belief. And belief needs feeding. To keep the share price climbing, Law's bank printed more and more paper money, far more than there was gold or silver to redeem it. The streets filled with banknotes. Prices of bread and goods began to rise sharply. This is the oldest trap in finance, dressed in new clothes, a flood of paper chasing a fixed amount of real wealth. Some clever insiders quietly began converting their paper fortunes back into gold coin and shipping it out of the country. In 1720, the confidence finally cracked. A few large holders decided to cash out, demanding real gold for their shares and their notes. Others saw them do it, and a quiet unease curdled into open fear. If the paper was really as good as gold, why were the smart men suddenly so desperate to swap it for metal? The rush to the exits began. Law tried to stop the bleeding with decrees. He limited how much gold a person could redeem. He made it illegal to hold more than a small amount of gold or silver, sending police to search homes. Then he simply declared, by law, that the shares and notes were worth less than before. Each measure was meant to restore order. Each one instead screamed that the paper could not be trusted. Panic became total. The collapse was merciless. The share price fell and kept falling. The banknotes became worthless paper. Fortunes built over a single giddy year evaporated in days. Outside the bank, desperate crowds crushed forward, trying to exchange their notes for anything at all. And on the worst days, people were trampled to death in the press of bodies. The dream of effortless riches ended in ruin, and in some cases, in blood. John Law, the most powerful financier in Europe, fled France in disgrace before the end of 1720, his fortune seized, his name a curse. He drifted across the continent and died 9 years later in Venice, poor, still gambling. France was so scarred that it would fear paper money and banks for generations, falling behind its rival across the Channel. And yet Law had not been entirely wrong. Paper money, credit, central banks, shares, all of it would one day become the machinery of the modern world. He had simply built the whole thing at once, on belief, with no brakes. And he had shown, for the first time on a national scale, exactly how it breaks. Bankrupt empire, sinister business, the dark side of business. Subscribe.